Morning.
Good morning, all. Morning, Russ. Welcome, and thank you for joining in this interview with the Sustainable Rum Summit, Two Drifters Rum. Well, for me, it's the first, let's say, also for the viewers and the listeners later on in the podcast, who and what are Russ and Gemma, if I pronounce it correctly.
Gemma.
Gemma, thank you.
Yeah, sorry, it's spelled funny.
Yeah. So who are you, and why did you start a rum distillery in Devon, the UK?
Yeah, so we are the Two Drifters, for the name. Gemma and I are a husband and wife team. So we're born and raised in Devon. This is where we're from. But my background in chemistry basically took us away. So we were in different parts of the world, 2 years here, 2 years there, traveling around. And one of the jobs I had in Vancouver, Canada, was where we were really inspired by craft distillery and craft breweries, and basically that really inspired the journey that we're now on. I had another position after that, a research position in Swansea after Vancouver, and it was from there that we started the brewery in our garage, and basically we would sell beer out of the back of the garage, and from that point on we basically knew this was the end goal. So the brewery was set up just so that we could practice. We can't practice distilling here in the UK. So it was to learn our craft a bit and understand a bit about how to set up the business. And then when we were moving back to Devon and setting up the distillery and the brewery side of things, we found that there was distillery equipment that we could actually afford. So in my head, I guess we'd always decided that distilling was hugely expensive and really difficult to get into. And aside from a lot of work getting the licenses here, actually, the equipment isn't so prohibitive. So we built a big brewery with a very small distillery on the side, and almost immediately, once we started selling everything, found that we could not make enough rum to keep up, which was fantastic because rum was what we really wanted to be doing. Switched and converted the brewery equipment into making rum, and now we've gone from 80 bottles of rum a week to 1,800 bottles of rum a week production capacity. So yeah, that's the whole Two Drifters thing. Gemma and I, the founders, and yeah, it's been us running everything for the first 18 months, and then the last couple of months we've brought extra people in, but that's been the Two Drifters journey till now. Yeah.
Wow. And you call yourselves, one of the slogans I read on the website is also spirit of innovation.
Yeah. So that's all about every aspect within it is we try and innovate somewhere along the line with every aspect, inside the bottle, even to our delivery. The big part of that comes from the sustainability side of things. So the fact that we have a carbon negative footprint and the innovation that goes behind that. So there are loads of options if you want to reduce your carbon footprint in terms of offsetting, but we specifically chose to use Climeworks, our partners in Switzerland, and they have a direct air capture machine. So it's sucking CO2 straight out the air and turning it into stone and burying it underground. So that's a really innovative way to think about the CO2 problem. And so that's part of it, and then everything else kind of stems around there, and we're constantly looking for new technologies that can help us improve our sustainability credentials.
So that was from the get-go, I assume. So if you said, well, we're going to start this distillery, it has to be, let's say, the sustainability aspect has to be integrated, or let's say a living organism, so to speak, within, let's say, your production, within the system, within your sustainability and outreach, right?
Oh, completely. So yeah, that research position I had in Swansea was into carbon capture and storage and turning CO2 into products. So knowing as much as I had done, to research that area, there's no way you could, in good conscience, with all that knowledge, set up a business and actually harm the planet and not do something about it when it's possible to do something about it. So yeah, that gave us the get-go. Right, we have to definitely start the business with this from the ground up. So every decision within the business we make is always governed by what is the CO2 impact of this, what is the environmental impact of what we do. So simple things like our distillery is fully electric, and all the equipment all the stills and everything is electric, and that allows us to then run it on renewable energy rather than fossil fuels. So we avoid all those CO2 emissions there. So, you know, yeah, it drives every decision. Our electric van does our local deliveries, charged on zero emissions energy as well. Yeah, it's a big part of what we do.
Was that difficult to get it all set up? Because part of it is, if I go back to, let's say, the supplying side, so the input, you also mentioned is 100% British molasses. I assume also then sustainable in a certain way or certified, all the way to, like you said, the electric van that is doing this distribution and the selling. You're partly dependent on others, let's say, to be sustainable.
Yeah, and I guess that's where we take a stance as to, you get a choice as to what CO2 emissions you start counting, right? And when in the world of CO2 emissions and carbon neutrality, you get different scopes, which is just basically how far back people look. We look at everything, at the entire picture, which I think is scope 3 in the terminology. So it's basically, you know, down to how we got to work. So I cycle to work, right, to reduce our carbon footprint there. But yeah, in terms of the molasses, yeah, it's British refined, but obviously the sugarcane isn't grown in our freezing climate this morning. You know, it's sugarcane grown in Central America predominantly, and then shipped to the UK for refining. So it's British molasses because it's made here, which gives us a consistent product and reduces the miles of that. But yeah, those are things we can't control. And that's where the point comes in that you need a method of offsetting that part that you can't control. And then you have a choice as to what you do. You know, planting trees is one way to reduce CO2 emissions, but we choose to use an innovative way to do that.
Yeah, true. And if you look at the waste element, if you're going to fermentation, etc., how do you work then with community to, let's say, offset you or recycle your waste, offset, let's say, your waste in,
yeah. So the molasses itself, so that molasses is a waste product from the refinery where they're making white sugar, and that is predominantly livestock feed anyway. So it goes to farmers all around the UK, and so we take that molasses, we take out the rum product, and then once we've done the distillation process, that waste molasses minus the rum is then transported to a local farmer just up the road. So he comes and collects it, and yeah, that feeds his cattle. So that closes a loop quite neatly, where you're basically taking a waste product, taking out rum, and then still it's being used as a product that has value, and adding value in the food chain. Yeah.
Do you think that ever the distillery, either yours or in general, could ever become circular?
Oh, I'd love to think it could be. So it's
Is that a moonshot for you, maybe?
No, well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, big things like that really excite me, and that's where I would love the distillery to be. Yeah, the way I would envisage, so our next plan is to have a destination distillery, right? We're in a warehouse here on an industrial estate, but to have a purpose-built building where, you know, the walls are generating electricity, or, you know, you've got solar panels everywhere, and all sorts of things and technologies would be there. That's the dream. But in terms of a circular economy, yeah, there are difficulties within there, but you've got to imagine that if you could create the conditions to grow your sugarcane using the energy that you're using to heat the stills, right, and then the CO2 from the fermenters was also going straight back into the plants, there is an opportunity to try something pretty cool in a greenhouse setting. So yeah, I'd love to try that on a small scale, and that would be a moonshot idea, as you say.
What are your learnings in that sense of, in general, on sustainability and collaborating with your key stakeholders? And what would you advise, let's say, to your peer distilleries around the world to do?
In terms of making them more sustainable, you mean?
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, so we're a small voice and really don't carry much weight in terms of changing their practices. I would love to be able to influence decisions. So you got to imagine, if you're a big rum distillery with influence over what's actually done in the growing regions, there you've got a real opportunity to reduce the emissions. If you think about, most of the emissions there will come from either the farm machinery, the farm buildings will probably run on diesel, and then you've got to imagine the pesticides and the fertilizer I mean, the fertilizer itself is huge, huge emissions that are greenhouse gas, but not necessarily CO2. Those are bits we can't control. But if you were a massive rum distillery with influence over what their practices are, then I think you could influence things that are, the practices that are used there, because there are technologies to reduce that pesticides, the fertilizer use. Obviously, it takes investment, but you've got to imagine that there's a real need, right, to do something about that. The farming is a big aspect there. Glass is a good one where you can have a bit more impact, and probably we will in the next year switch to lighter glass. It's a tough balance in spirits because people have a perception of a premium bottle has to be heavy. That's hugely dangerous and damaging to the planet. So there is a balance to strike with looking premium, feeling premium, everyone being happy with the product, but not just harming it for the sake of looking good.
Is that also part of your, let's say, your sustainability marketing towards the consumer? You see that a lot. It's already there in chocolate, in coffee. You know, it's already part of the system. It has to be either Roots or Rainforest Alliance. It was on the top of the pack of a chocolate bar. Now I think it's something on the back, and in maybe 5 years it's not there anymore because it's already mainstream. How is your story on that sustainability? That it's not, listen people, it's not the perfect glass bottle. It's a bit different, it's recycled, but it's about the premium quality of the product itself. So look through the glass, so to speak. Yeah,
I mean, that would be amazing if there was such a scheme for glass or for spirits in general. I mean, there's different aspects, aren't there? Because there's kind of the fair trade side of things as well for producers, because of the regions where sugarcane is grown, as well as glass bottle. If there was a way to convey that to the consumer, that would be excellent. And I guess that will happen with time, because that seems to be happening throughout. I mean, certainly within Europe, it happens like that there are different schemes to highlight things to consumers. So you can imagine at some point there has to be some CO2 impact demonstrated on packaging. So yeah, hopefully, I would love that.
One of the challenges or dreams you're coping now with is the crowdfunding.
Yeah.
So access to capital, it's going quite well. That's an understatement, I think.
Yeah.
You share, let's see, your insights a bit on how you started, your lessons learned, and what do you want to achieve?
Yeah.
Already
so
now.
crowdfunding has been an amazing eye-opener for us. So we maybe back in September this year met up with two of the employees. So Crowdcube, the platform that we're using, they're actually based in Exeter, just up the road from us, and two of the ladies in their office wanted to come for a rum tour. They wanted to come and have a look around the distillery, and then they came and had a look, and I showed them around, and basically they started explaining the process and explaining the advantages of using a crowdfunding platform, that you get this whole community of people that want to come along with the journey, that buy into what we're trying to achieve. That, you know, we think we have a great message about sustainability and about what a business can achieve from the bottom up, and try and set an example to what other businesses can do. And so they completely bought into that and thought it would work really well on their platform to showcase it. So we asked initially for 150,000 investment. You know, we're giving away equity in the business in exchange for that investment. And yeah, 3 hours after we started live, you know, we'd funded. So it was overwhelming. The response was fantastic. And yeah, we have now 5 days left, and we're something like 165% over target, and you know, it's still climbing. So fingers crossed we can get as much as possible. I mean, that money is partly what you were suggesting, which is to get the message across cleanly and immediately to consumers that sustainability is part of what we do. Because, you know, we're not marketing people, we're not branding people. How do you stand out on a supermarket shelf? Two Drifters rum is right there. You know, that's the most sustainable rum you can buy. Wow, I should. Why would I choose any of these others? They're the same price. How do we achieve that? That's the challenge, you know, we're laying down to these branding agencies to try and help us with.
what were the challenges in developing, let's say, your pitch and your proposal for the crowdfunding? Maybe topics that you didn't think of, but you needed to think of now to convince, let's say, investors.
Yeah, so it's it's a lot of work up front actually. So those 3 hours, it sounds great and easy, but it's just a few months in the making. You need a very compelling story. It needs to be coherent, and then so you put together a pitch. So you have a whole page that you put together all this stuff with a marketing material. Basically, we did a video that explains exactly what we want the money for and what we're about, and introduces you to us. And then then you got to think all about the financial side of things. So if you're asking people to part with their money, you need to convince them that what you're doing is sensible. So forecasting and budgeting and making sure you can explain where the money is going to be spent as well. So there's a fair bit of work to put all of that together, but that's the groundwork that you do before you put it out to the public.
And you also applied for the UK fund, the Green Distillery Fund. Is that also something that you would advise? And I'm looking into that as well. I say, what are governments doing? If you look, they talk a lot about sustainability. These sectors have to become sustainable. Okay, what is government doing from a policy perspective, but also from an investment perspective, of knowledge perspective, in really driving, let's say, different sectors, including, let's say, the spirit sector, to become sustainable? Is this the Green Fund? Is that for you like that's an interesting model which should be applied in every country that's producing spirit?
I would have thought this is a good way. So the UK government takes a strategy of how can we decarbonize industry. Industry causes a lot of the CO2 emissions in the UK. I mean, it's not specific to, it's not the same in every country, right? That maybe the energy sector is the biggest emitter in a lot of countries, but certainly here in the UK, industry is a massive emitter. So how can you decarbonize these different industries? And then what they did was they split them up into different categories and said, right, here's some money for you to look at this specific industry. So for us, the distilleries industry, and that's what the Green Fund was for distilleries. But it's the same for lots of other manufacturing industries too. Yeah, I think that kind of top level down provides a real incentive for businesses to try things, right, which otherwise would be risky to take on. And actually a big part of the proposal is explaining why that is. So you have to explain why it's risky, why you couldn't just go out and get private funding to do it. And it's because it might not be cheaper to do it. So if you're looking at alternative fuel sources in order to reduce the emissions, so let's take the distillery industry in Scotland is the biggest emitter, right? So they produce tons and tons, 530,000 tons of CO2 a year. That's a lot of CO2. And it's because of where those distilleries are located that they have to use fossil fuels to heat their stills, and the size of them, right? That becomes a problem at scale. So what fuel can you use to replace it? Or are there other ways to heat the stills to do that? That was the challenge laid down. And that's got to be the way to think about it. And that must be true in all kinds of places around the world, that there are opportunities to switch out the fuel, and from there reduce emissions.
Going back a bit to the storytelling, how do you strike a balance, or what is your lessons learned so far in the market competition, consumer interest, and then the price point, which Two Drifters on the shelf in a retail store, and that the consumer picks that bottle or your bottle?
Now, this probably stems a bit from the way I think about things, but I don't believe, and it does hurt to say, that consumers care enough about the environment first to pay over the odds for a product. So I think what I mean by that is it needs to be within the price of the products, right? That it's sustainable. If you're given a cheaper option or an environmentally friendly option and it's more expensive, most people won't choose that yet. Maybe that's shifting, and I hope it does. But so the way that we set about it from the start was to think, how can we include it within the price? We have to include this within the price from the start. And as long as you set out with that goal. It's just a cost that's associated. It's no different to buying in the molasses, right? That's a cost. So you think of it as just part of your direct costs of making the product, and then from then on it makes sense. And that's our ethos, yeah, is to just include it, swallow it up, and not charge over the odds for the product.
What is the moonshot for Two Drifters? In 2030, you are...
In 2030, so 10 years, we are producing somewhere like half a million bottles a year of rum, maybe up to 1 million, somewhere in that sort of region, from our purpose-built distillery that has full-on visitor center, showcasing the carbon capture technologies, coupled with all of the renewable energy generated on site, and it's all encompassing and displays amazing rum, much higher quality, and reduced CO2 emissions and environmental impact. Yeah, with as close to circular as we can get it. That's the moonshot idea, right? Definitely.
Yeah, that's a good one. Do you see a need for more shared learnings within, let's say, the craft rum distillery industry?
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, there's so much to learn in terms of this craft industry is really useful because it gives you small little experiments on how to do things, right? So we can be one rum distillery trying something sustainable, but then you've got 4 or 5 different other ones trying something different, and it would be amazing if there was a sharing of that experience. For me, it's like an academic background, so that's how I think about things anyway, as in academic groups sharing it by publishing the data that they produce. That's a really great way, I still believe, in the scientific method of bringing all of us forward. So yes, firmly believe that we should share.
And what's a topic that you would say, I would like to put out there? If I have an academic discussion group, okay, this is the topic that I say, well, we're working on that, but is there anyone already working on it, let's say, more ahead, that we don't need to reinvent the wheel?
Yeah, capturing the CO2 off the fermenter and turning that into something useful. So that's free CO2 that's coming off at point sources off your fermentation vessel that you can do stuff with. And I'd love to know what others do. I mean, we try things, but it would be a great discussion to see what was possible with all of that. It's a lot of CO2, and it's a way of reducing your impact very, very quickly. Even though the general formula is that all that CO2 that comes out of fermentation was taken in by the plant. So that there's a balance there, but that immediately puts you in credit. So it's a worthwhile thing to do. So it'd be really fun to know what everyone else does.
Okay.